Effective immediately, your employment with Metro International Airport is terminated. The words echoed through Gate 47's employee break room like a gunshot. 12 staff members sat frozen, their lunch break interrupted by what was unfolding before them. Marcus Wellington stood at the head of the table in his tailored navy suit, his airport executive badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, reading from an official termination letter. And the woman he was firing? His own mother. My name is Lily Wellington. I'm 58 years old, and 6 months ago I was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. For 32 years, I'd worked as a custodial supervisor at this airport, starting when my son was just a baby. I'd scrubbed floors, cleaned bathrooms, and trained new hires through 3 different terminal expansions. I'd worked double shifts to pay for Marcus's private school tuition. I'd sacrificed vacations to afford his college expenses. I'd believed every promise he made about taking care of me once he made it. Now he stood before me, his face a mask of cold professionalism, destroying me in front of my colleagues like I was nothing. Mrs. Wellington, Marcus continued, his voice carrying that corporate smoothness that made my skin crawl. Your performance has been deemed unsatisfactory. Multiple complaints have been filed regarding your work quality and attendance. I sat perfectly still in my folding chair, my hands resting calmly on the break room table. Inside, my heart was pounding, but I'd learned something important over the past 3 months. People reveal their true selves when they think you're powerless. Marcus, I said quietly, and I watched him flinch slightly at the use of his first name. What complaint specifically? That's confidential information, he replied, not meeting my eyes. You'll receive all documentation by mail. Security will escort you out. You have 15 minutes to clear your locker. Around the table, my co-workers sat in stunned silence. Teresa, who'd worked beside me for 18 years, had her hand over her mouth. James looked like he might actually stand up and intervene. Even the younger staff members who barely knew me seemed disturbed by what they were witnessing. But what none of them knew, what Marcus especially didn't know, was that I'd seen this coming. 3 months ago, shortly after my cancer diagnosis, I'd overheard Marcus on his phone in the executive parking garage. I'd been leaving my shift early for a chemotherapy appointment when I heard his voice echoing off the concrete walls. She's a liability now, Dad, he'd been saying to someone. I'd frozen behind a support column, listening. The cancer, the medical bills, the insurance costs. It's going to reflect badly on my department's numbers. I need to find a way to let her go before the quarterly review. In that moment, standing in the shadows of that parking garage with my chemotherapy appointment card clutched in my shaking hand, I'd made a decision. I'd started carrying my phone everywhere, recording every interaction, documenting every conversation. Because I knew my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, was planning to throw me away like trash. Now, watching him perform this theatrical termination in front of witnesses, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I understand, I said calmly, standing up slowly. My legs were shaky, a side effect of my treatment that I'd been hiding from everyone. I'll clear my things. Marcus looked surprised by my composure. He'd probably expected tears, maybe begging. His jaw tightened slightly. Security will accompany you, he repeated, gesturing to the 2 guards who'd been standing awkwardly by the door. As I walked toward the exit, Teresa grabbed my arm. Lily, this isn't right. This isn't legal. You should call someone. I patted her hand gently. It's okay, Teresa. Everything happens for a reason. The walk through the airport felt endless. Staff members I'd known for decades stopped and stared as security escorted me past the gates. Passengers glanced up from their phones. Everyone could see what was happening. A sick, older black woman being walked out by guards like she'd committed a crime. At my locker in the custodial office, I packed my personal items slowly. A photo of Marcus at his high school graduation, beaming in his cap and gown. Another of us at his college commencement. a third from the day he got promoted to airport operations manager just 2 years ago. He'd hugged me that day, promised he'd take care of me, promised my struggles were over. I left all the photos in the locker. I didn't want them anymore. But I did take the small recording device I'd hidden in my work bag, and I made sure my phone was fully charged. As security walked me to the employee exit, I passed Marcus in the hallway. He was talking on his phone, laughing about something. When he saw me, his expression shifted to something I'd never seen on my son's face before. Contempt mixed with relief. "Have a good day, Mrs. Wellington," he said formally, already turning away. I stopped walking. The security guards paused, uncertain. "Marcus," I said, and something in my tone made him turn back around. "Do you remember what I used to tell you when you were little? When other kids would bully you for not having a father, for living in that tiny apartment, for wearing secondhand clothes?" He stared at me, clearly irritated by the delay. "Mom, this isn't the time. I told you that truth always rises to the surface," I continued, my voice steady. "That lies might work for a while, but eventually, everything comes to light. Are you threatening me?" His voice dropped dangerously low. "No, baby," I said softly. "I'm just reminding you of something you seem to have forgotten." Then I walked out of Metro International Airport, past the security checkpoint, through the automatic doors, into the bright afternoon sunlight, and I didn't cry. Not yet. Because crying was for later, after I'd done what needed to be done. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd recorded everything, not just today's termination, but months of conversations, emails I'd accidentally been copied on, text messages between him and other executives discussing how to handle the Lily situation without triggering a discrimination lawsuit. He thought he'd gotten rid of his sick, inconvenient mother, cleanly and professionally. He thought his career was secure, his reputation intact. He thought he'd won. But he'd forgotten the most important lesson I'd ever taught him. Never underestimate a mother's will to survive. And never, ever betray the woman who gave you everything. If this story of betrayal and justice has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything. The real question wasn't whether Marcus would face consequences for what he'd done. The question was whether he'd still have a career, or his freedom, when I was finished. The studio apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked through the door. One room, kitchenette, bathroom, and a window that overlooked the parking lot of a discount grocery store. This was what 32 years of loyalty had bought me, a place barely big enough to breathe in. I set my cardboard box of personal items on the kitchen counter and stared at it. A coffee mug with "World's Best Mom" printed on the side that Marcus had given me when he was 12. A small potted plant Teresa had brought me after my diagnosis. My employee ID badge with a photo from 5 years ago, back when I still had hair, before the chemotherapy had stolen it. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "Heard you got let go today. That's what happens when you can't keep up anymore. Maybe it's time to accept you're past your prime." A concerned colleague. I stared at the message, my hands trembling slightly. Marcus had people doing his dirty work now, twisting the knife even after I'd left the building, making sure I understood I was finished. But what he didn't understand was that every message like this, every cruel word, every arrogant move he made was just adding fuel to a fire he couldn't see yet. I'd raised Marcus alone after his father walked out when he was 6 months old. Calvin Wellington had taken one look at fatherhood and decided he wanted no part of it. Left me with a baby, an apartment I could barely afford, and a custodial job at the airport that paid $8.50 an hour. I remembered those early years with painful clarity. Working overnight shifts so I could take Marcus to daycare during the day, sleeping 3, maybe 4 hours if I was lucky, eating ramen and canned soup so my son could have fresh fruit and milk, walking 40 minutes to work because I couldn't afford both bus fare and Marcus's school supplies. When he was 8, Marcus came home crying because the other kids made fun of his shoes. Secondhand sneakers from the Goodwill that were 2 sizes too big because I'd bought them hoping he'd grow into them. I'd worked a double shift the next day and bought him new ones, the kind all the other kids had. It took me 3 months to pay off that credit card. When he was 16, he got accepted to Jefferson Prep, a private school with a price tag that made my stomach hurt. The guidance counselor said it would change his life, open doors, give him opportunities kids like him rarely got. So I'd taken a second job cleaning office buildings after my airport shift. I'd worked 7 days a week for 4 years straight so Marcus could have that education. College was worse. Student loans helped, but they didn't cover everything. I'd skipped meals so he could have spending money. I'd ignored the strange lump in my breast for 2 years because I couldn't afford to miss work for doctor's appointments. By the time I finally got it checked, the cancer had already started spreading. And through it all, Marcus had promised he'd take care of me. "When I make it, Mom," he'd say, hugging me after another successful semester, another internship, another step up the ladder. "When I make it, you'll never have to worry again. I'm going to buy you a house. You'll never work another day." I'd believed him. God help me, I'd actually believed him. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my insurance company. My health coverage through the airport would terminate in 30 days. My next chemotherapy session was in 2 weeks. The one after that, I'd have to pay out of pocket. Roughly $8,000 per treatment. I had $240 in my savings account. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in. For the first time since leaving the airport, I felt the panic starting to rise in my chest. I sat down on my secondhand couch and forced myself to breathe slowly, the way my oncologist had taught me during the anxiety attacks that came with my diagnosis. My laptop sat on the coffee table, still open to the job search websites I'd been browsing this morning before my shift. Now those searches felt pointless. Who would hire a 58-year-old black woman with cancer, no current employment, and a termination on her record? I was about to close the laptop when an email notification popped up. The sender's name made my blood run cold. From Marcus Wellington. Subject, final warning. Mom, I'm sending this as a courtesy. Do not contact anyone at the airport about your termination. Do not attempt to file any complaints. Do not embarrass me or damage my reputation. You signed an arbitration agreement when you were hired. You have no legal recourse. If you cause problems, I'll make sure every employer in this city knows you were terminated for cause. Accept your severance package when it arrives and move on quietly. This is the last time I'll be this generous. M. Generous. He called this generous. The severance package arrived by email 10 minutes later. 2 weeks' pay, $1,840 before taxes, for 32 years of service. I read the email 3 times, feeling something cold and sharp crystallizing in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was Marcus systematically destroying any chance I had of fighting back, of surviving, of exposing what he'd done. He was silencing me, and he thought he had the power to do it. My phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I was so tired, so overwhelmed. But the caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Mrs. Wellington? This is David Chen. I'm an attorney with Chen & Associates. I was at gate 47 today when your termination happened. I was on my laptop waiting for a flight. I sat up straighter. You were there? I was. And Mrs. Wellington, what I witnessed was one of the most egregious violations of employment law I've seen in 20 years of practice. I'd like to talk to you about representation. Pro bono. Why would you help me for free? I asked carefully. In my experience, nothing was ever really free. Because I lost my mother to breast cancer 3 years ago, David said quietly. She was a cafeteria worker at a hospital, and in her final year they made her life miserable, hoping she'd quit before they had to deal with her medical costs. I couldn't help her. I was in law school, powerless. But I can help you. For the first time all day, I felt something other than despair. What would I need to do? First, tell me everything. And I mean everything: conversations, emails, any documentation you have. Second, don't sign anything Marcus sends you. That severance offer, it's a trap. There's language in there that would prevent you from ever taking legal action. I have recordings, I said slowly. Months of them. Conversations about getting rid of me. Plans to manufacture complaints. Even some discussions about insurance costs. David was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge of barely contained excitement. Mrs. Wellington, do you understand what you're telling me? If those recordings are admissible, and in this state, single-party consent recordings are legal, you have enough evidence to bring a case that could cost the airport millions. Age discrimination, disability discrimination, retaliation for a medical condition, wrongful termination. This isn't just about getting your job back. This is about holding them accountable. I don't want revenge, I said softly. I just want justice. Sometimes, David replied, they're the same thing. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, not bothering to turn on the lights. My phone's screen glowed in my hand. I opened the recording app and played back the audio from this morning's termination. Marcus's voice filled the small room. Effective immediately, your employment with Metro International Airport is terminated. Cold. Professional. Completely devoid of any recognition that he was speaking to his mother. I played another recording, this one from 6 weeks ago. I'd been walking past Marcus's office late at night, finishing my shift, when I'd heard raised voices. I'd stopped, phone already recording, listening through the partially open door. The quarterly numbers are bad enough without my mother's medical costs dragging us down further, Marcus had been saying to someone. I've documented every minor mistake she's made. I've got 3 other supervisors ready to sign statements about performance issues. It's airtight. Another voice, older, male. You sure about this, Marcus? Firing your own mother is going to raise eyebrows. People talk. That's why we're documenting everything, making it look legitimate. She's sick. She's slowing down. She's costing us money. It's a business decision, not a personal one. And what about her treatment? Doesn't she need the insurance? A pause. Then Marcus's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it. That's not my problem anymore. She should have saved money instead of spending everything on me. I'd stood frozen in that hallway, listening to my son, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, reduced my life to a line item that needed to be eliminated. That was the night I'd started planning. Not revenge, not even justice yet, just survival. Now, sitting in my dark apartment with medical bills piling up and my future crumbling around me, I opened my laptop and began organizing every recording, every email, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 3 months. Marcus thought he'd silenced me. He thought his position, his authority, his carefully constructed paper trail would protect him, but he'd forgotten something crucial about the woman who raised him. I'd taught him everything he knew about strategy, about patience, about playing the long game. He just never considered I might use those lessons against him. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Marcus. I hope you understand this was necessary. Business isn't personal, Mom. You taught me that. I stared at those words for a long moment. Then I typed back a single sentence. You're right. I did teach you that, but I taught you something else too. Actions have consequences. You're about to remember that lesson. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Then stopped. He didn't know how to respond. Good. Because this was just the beginning, and Marcus Wellington was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is the one you've underestimated your entire life. David Chen's office was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined cold corporate glass and expensive furniture, but instead I found myself in a modest suite above a Chinese restaurant in downtown. The walls were covered with family photos and framed degrees, and the whole place smelled faintly of ginger and garlic from downstairs. My mother used to own that restaurant, David explained, gesturing toward the floor as he poured tea into small ceramic cups. I keep my office here to remember where I came from. Also, the rent is cheap, which means I can take cases like yours. I sat across from him at a conference table covered with printed emails, transcripts of my recordings, and legal documents. We'd been meeting for 3 days straight, building what David called an airtight case. This recording from September 14th, David said, pointing to a transcript. When Marcus told the HR director that your chemotherapy appointments were convenient excuses for missing work. That alone is disability discrimination. Then this one from October 2nd when he discussed manipulating your performance reviews. That's retaliation and fraud. I wrapped my hands around the warm teacup, still struggling to process that my own son had said these things. And this one, David continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is the one that's going to destroy his career. November 8th, the conversation with the airport's insurance consultant. He pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the small office. Look, I don't care about the optics. Cancer patients are expensive. My department's budget can't absorb her medical costs. Find me a legal way to terminate her before the next insurance cycle kicks in, or I'll find someone who can. That's not just discrimination, David said quietly. That's conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. If the insurance company finds out the airport was terminating employees specifically to avoid medical costs, they could face federal charges, and Marcus put it on record. How did I not see this coming? I whispered. How did I raise someone capable of this? David looked at me with something like pity. Mrs. Wellington, Lily, you didn't raise him to be this. The world did. Corporate culture did. Ambition did. You raised a boy who knew love and sacrifice. Somewhere along the way, he forgot those lessons. My phone vibrated on the table. Another text from Marcus. They'd been coming daily, each one more threatening than the last. Mom, people are asking questions about your termination. I need you to tell anyone who contacts you that it was a mutual decision. Say you wanted to focus on your health. If you don't, I'll be forced to release your performance documentation publicly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I showed the text to David. He actually smiled. He's panicking. That's good. It means he knows something's wrong. David picked up his phone. And speaking of people asking questions, I have someone I'd like you to meet. 20 minutes later, Teresa Martinez walked into David's office. My former coworker looked nervous, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Lily, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I'm so sorry. I should have done something when it happened. I should have stood up. Teresa, it's okay, I said, standing to hug her. You were there. That's what matters. It's not okay, Teresa insisted, pulling back to look at me. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Half the custodial staff is ready to walk out. We've been talking to the union rep. What Marcus did to you, it's got people scared. If he can do it to someone who's been there 32 years, someone who's his own mother, what's he going to do to the rest of us? David leaned forward. Teresa, Lily told me you witnessed the termination. Would you be willing to give a statement? Testify if needed? I'll do more than that, Teresa said firmly. She pulled a manila folder from her purse and laid it on the table. Marcus ordered me to backdate 3 disciplinary write-ups against Lily, said it was to build the case for her termination. I refused, but I kept copies of the blank forms he gave me, with his signature already on them. And I'm not the only supervisor he asked. David's eyes widened. You're telling me there's a paper trail of him attempting to fabricate documentation? More than that, Teresa said. There's an email chain. Marcus sent it to 5 supervisors, asking us to recall any incidents involving Lily's performance, even if we hadn't documented them at the time. He basically asked us to make stuff up. 3 supervisors refused. 2 went along with it. Who went along? I asked quietly. Brad Morrison and Jennifer Lee. Both new hires in the last year, both trying to impress management. Teresa looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, Lily. They wrote complaints about you that never happened. Marcus used them as part of his justification for firing you. David was already typing notes on his laptop. This is witness tampering and fraud. Teresa, would those other supervisors who refused, would they be willing to come forward? James already said yes. He's been with the airport 26 years. He told me if they can do this to Lily, none of us are safe. Teresa's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. And there's something else. After Lily was escorted out, Marcus held a staff meeting, told everyone that what happened was a lesson in accountability, said that personal relationships don't matter in business, and anyone who couldn't meet standards would face the same consequences. He used firing his own mother as a motivational threat. David looked genuinely shocked, which was saying something given what we'd already reviewed. It gets worse, Teresa continued. Someone asked about Lily's medical condition, whether it was considered in the termination decision. Marcus said, and I quote, "Medical issues are not an excuse for poor performance. If you can't do your job, there are plenty of people who can. Age and illness don't entitle anyone to special treatment." The room went silent. David and Teresa were both looking at me, waiting for my reaction. But I felt strangely calm. Each new piece of evidence, each fresh cruelty, was just more proof that the boy I'd raised was gone. The man who'd replaced him was a stranger. How many people heard him say that? David asked. 32 staff members, and someone recorded it. Teresa pulled out her phone and played an audio file. Marcus's voice, clear and unmistakable, saying those exact words. David sat back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Lily, do you understand what we have here? This isn't just a wrongful termination case anymore. This is a class action waiting to happen. If Marcus created a hostile environment, if he's threatening other employees based on age or medical conditions, if he's systematically targeting people he sees as liabilities, we could bring a case that exposes the entire culture he's created. I don't want to hurt innocent people, I said carefully. The staff, the other workers, they're just trying to survive like I was. You wouldn't be hurting them, David assured me. You'd be protecting them. If we expose what Marcus has done, the airport will be forced to change their policies, strengthen their protections, ensure this never happens again. You'd be saving the jobs and dignity of every person Marcus sees as disposable. That evening, back in my small apartment, I organized the evidence one more time. Recordings, emails, witness statements, documentation of Marcus's pattern of behavior. Laid out on my coffee table, it looked like the case file for a criminal, not a resume for an ambitious executive. My phone rang. An unknown number again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Mrs. Wellington? A young woman's voice, nervous and uncertain. My name is Keisha Brooks. I worked in HR at the airport until 2 weeks ago. I heard through Teresa that you're building a case against Marcus Wellington. I am, I said carefully. I want to help. I need to help. Keisha took a shaky breath. Marcus came to me 3 months ago with your file, told me to find a legal way to terminate you. I said I couldn't. There were no legitimate grounds. So he went over my head to my supervisor. When I objected, when I said what he was doing violated federal law, they pushed me out too. Made my life so miserable I had to quit. I'm so sorry, I said softly. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Because Marcus isn't just targeting people with medical issues. He's targeting anyone who won't go along with his agenda. I have emails, internal memos, a whole documentation trail of him pressuring HR to bend rules, ignore policies, fabricate reasons for termination. And Mrs. Wellington? Keisha paused. He's planning to do it again. There are 3 more employees on his list, all over 50, all with higher insurance costs. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Who? I'll send you the names, but you need to move fast. He's planning to execute his next termination in 2 weeks, right before the holiday break. That way there's less scrutiny, fewer people around to ask questions. After Keisha hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't even just about justice for what Marcus had done. This was about stopping him before he destroyed more lives. I called David. He answered on the first ring. "We need to file," I said. "Now. Not next week. Not after we gather more evidence. Now." "What happened?" I told him about Keisha, about the 3 employees on Marcus's termination list, about the timeline. "Okay," David said, and I could hear him moving, rustling papers. "Okay. We file first thing tomorrow morning. Federal court, full complaint, every charge we can make stick. Age discrimination, disability discrimination, retaliation, fraud, hostile work environment. We'll request an immediate injunction to prevent any further terminations. And Lily, we're going to make this public. The media needs to know what's happening at that airport." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy Marcus used to be. The 6-year-old who cried when his father left. The 12-year-old who made me breakfast in bed on Mother's Day. The 16-year-old who hugged me after I worked a double shift, promising he'd make it all worth it someday. Where had that boy gone? When had ambition twisted him into someone who could look his own mother in the eye and destroy her without flinching? My phone lit up with one more message. Marcus again. "I heard you've been talking to people, making accusations. Mom, I'm warning you one last time. Drop this. You're sick. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. Don't throw away your dignity over something that was just business. I'll give you another week of severance if you sign the papers. This is your last chance to end this quietly." I read the message 3 times. Then I typed my response. "You're right about one thing. This is the last chance. But not for me. For you. Tomorrow morning, you're going to understand that business isn't just business when you've destroyed the life of someone who loved you. See you in court, Marcus." I hit send and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Marcus Wellington would discover that the mother he'd discarded like trash had been preparing for this moment since the day she overheard him planning her destruction. Tomorrow, the woman he'd underestimated his entire life would show him exactly what she'd learned in 32 years of surviving in a world that didn't value people like her. And tomorrow, everyone would see that sometimes the quietest person in the room is quiet, because they're listening, learning, and planning something nobody saw coming. The federal courthouse was packed. News cameras lined the hallway outside courtroom 7B, reporters shouting questions at anyone who walked past. I hadn't expected this level of attention, but David had warned me the night before. "A son firing his cancer-stricken mother to save money?" he'd said. "Lily, this is the kind of story that captures everything wrong with corporate America. It's going national." Now, walking through those courthouse doors with David beside me and Teresa behind us, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes. Camera flashes, microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping. "Mrs. Wellington, how do you feel about your son's actions? Is it true he falsified documents? What do you want people to know?" David raised his hand, and surprisingly, the crowd quieted. "Mrs. Wellington will make a statement after the hearing. For now, she asks for privacy and respect." Inside the courtroom, Marcus was already seated at the defense table with 3 attorneys in expensive suits. He looked impeccable as always. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, gold cufflinks. When he saw me walk in, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not remorse, irritation, like I was an inconvenient problem that refused to disappear. Behind him, the airport's legal team filled 2 more tables. This wasn't just about me anymore. David had filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of 12 current and former employees, all terminated under suspicious circumstances, all over 50, all with significant medical expenses. Judge Patricia Morrison, a black woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, entered the courtroom. All rise. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be routine. Arguments about whether our case had merit, whether it should proceed to trial. But David had other plans. "Your Honor," he began, standing with a tablet in his hand, "what we're about to present isn't just evidence of wrongful termination. It's evidence of systematic, deliberate, and calculated discrimination that goes to the highest levels of Metro International Airport's management." Marcus's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Richard Blackwell, stood immediately. "Your Honor, these are serious allegations being made without proper—" "Mr. Blackwell, you'll have your turn," Judge Morrison said coolly. "Mr. Chen, proceed." David connected his tablet to the courtroom's display system. "I'm going to play a series of recordings made by Mrs. Lily Wellington over a 3-month period. Under state law, single-party consent recordings are admissible. Mrs. Wellington was present for every conversation recorded." The first audio clip played through the courtroom speakers. Marcus's voice, crystal clear. "The quarterly numbers are bad enough without my mother's medical costs dragging us down further. I've documented every minor mistake she's made. I've got 3 other supervisors ready to sign statements about performance issues. It's airtight." I watched Marcus's face drain of color. He leaned over to whisper frantically to his attorney, but Blackwell was staring at the speakers in obvious shock. David played another clip, then another, each one more damning than the last. Marcus discussing insurance costs, planning fabricated documentation, pressuring HR to find legal loopholes, threatening supervisors who wouldn't cooperate. The courtroom was dead silent, except for Marcus's recorded voice, casually discussing the destruction of his mother's life like it was a budget meeting. Then David played the recording that made even Judge Morrison's expression harden. Marcus's voice. "Look, I don't care about the optics. Cancer patients are expensive. My department's budget can't absorb her medical costs. Find me a legal way to terminate her before the next insurance cycle kicks in, or I'll find someone who can." Another voice, older. "Marcus, this is your mother we're talking about." Marcus, cold and flat. "That's not my problem anymore. She should have saved money instead of spending everything on me." The words hung in the air like poison. I heard gasps from the gallery behind me. One of the reporters in the back row was openly crying. "Your Honor," David continued, his voice tight with controlled fury, "Mr. Wellington didn't just terminate his mother illegally. He created a systematic pattern of targeting employees based on age, medical conditions, and insurance costs. We have 12 plaintiffs, 37 recordings, 42 emails, and sworn testimony from 6 supervisors who were pressured to fabricate performance issues." Blackwell was on his feet. "Your Honor, we need time to review this evidence, to verify its authenticity." "It's authentic," David interrupted. "We had it forensically analyzed, timestamps verified, voice patterns confirmed. And in case you're thinking about claiming it was taken out of context, we have the full recordings available. Hours of them." Judge Morrison looked at Marcus with an expression I recognized, the same one I'd had when I first heard those recordings. Disgust mixed with disbelief. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos of attorneys whispering and papers shuffling. "Stand up." Marcus stood, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "Did you make these statements?" Judge Morrison asked. "Your Honor, I'd like to invoke my Fifth Amendment right." "This isn't a criminal proceeding, yet," the judge said sharply. "But I'll note your refusal to answer. Mr. Blackwell, does the airport wish to make a statement?" Before Blackwell could respond, the courtroom doors opened. A woman in a navy pantsuit strode in, followed by 2 people in business attire. "Your Honor, I'm Catherine Reeves, newly appointed Interim Director of Metro International Airport. As of 1 hour ago, Marcus Wellington has been placed on administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The airport's board of directors was made aware of these recordings this morning, and we are fully cooperating with this lawsuit." Marcus spun around, his face flushed red. "Catherine, you can't—" "Sit down, Mr. Wellington," Judge Morrison ordered. "Ms. Reeves, Continue. The airport acknowledges serious violations occurred. We're prepared to settle with Mrs. Wellington and all affected plaintiffs. Full back pay, restoration of benefits, compensation for emotional distress, and a public apology. Additionally, we're terminating Mr. Wellington's employment effective immediately. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were already typing on their phones. Marcus's attorneys looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor, and Marcus himself stood frozen, his perfect facade finally cracking as he realized everything was collapsing around him. "You can't fire me," he said, his voice rising. "I built that department. I increased efficiency by 30%. You committed multiple federal crimes," Catherine interrupted coldly. "We've already referred your case to the Department of Labor and the FBI for insurance fraud investigation. Your career in airport management is over, Mr. Wellington." David leaned over to whisper to me. "This is even better than I hoped. The airport is throwing him under the bus to save themselves." Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Order. Mr. Wellington, sit down before I hold you in contempt." Marcus sat, but his hands were shaking. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked at me. Really looked at me. And I saw something I'd never seen in my son's eyes before. Fear. "Mrs. Wellington," Judge Morrison said, her tone softening slightly. "Would you like to make a statement?" I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. David handed me a microphone. The courtroom was absolutely silent. 32 years, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I worked at that airport for 32 years. I cleaned bathrooms when my son was a baby. I scrubbed floors when he was in elementary school. I worked double shifts to pay for his education. I sacrificed everything, my health, my savings, my future, so he could have opportunities I never had. I looked directly at Marcus. And when I got sick, when I needed help, when I needed my son to remember even a fraction of what I'd done for him, he looked at me as a budget problem to be eliminated. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. He didn't just fire me, he humiliated me. He threatened me. He tried to silence me, because he thought his position, his authority, his connections would protect him. He thought I was too old, too sick, too powerless to fight back. I paused, taking a breath. But he forgot something. He forgot that I'm the woman who taught him how to survive. I'm the woman who showed him that you fight for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. I didn't want this. I wanted my son to be a good man. I wanted him to remember that success means nothing if you lose your humanity achieving it. But since he couldn't learn that lesson through love, maybe he'll learn it through consequences. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Marcus's attorneys had stopped shuffling papers. To anyone watching this who thinks they can treat people as disposable, who thinks power means you can destroy lives without accountability, this is your warning. Truth always rises to the surface, and the people you underestimate might just be the ones who bring you down. If you've been following this journey from betrayal to justice, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next will show you that standing up for what's right, no matter the cost, is always worth it. I sat down, my hands trembling. Teresa reached forward from the row behind me and squeezed my shoulder. David was typing furiously on his tablet. "Your Honor," Blackwell said, standing with obvious reluctance. "In light of these developments, Mr. Wellington wishes to make a personal statement." Judge Morrison nodded. Marcus stood, his perfect composure finally shattered. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, I never meant—" "Mr. Wellington," I said, my voice steady despite my tears. "You called me Mom. That's the first time you've done that since you fired me. But it's too late for that. The boy I raised would never have done what you did. That boy is gone. And the man standing here? I don't know him anymore." Marcus's face crumpled, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a profound sadness for everything we'd lost. By the time we left the courthouse, the story had already gone viral. Our justice for Lily was trending nationally. News outlets were playing clips of the recordings. Social media was exploding with people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination, of being abandoned by family, of fighting systems designed to crush them. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages from former co-workers, from strangers, from organizations offering support. One message stood out, from a woman named Patricia. "My company fired me when I got diagnosed with MS. Because of your courage, I'm filing my own lawsuit tomorrow. Thank you for showing us we don't have to accept this." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about my fight anymore. It was about every person who'd been discarded, discriminated against, told they were too old, too sick, too expensive to matter. And they were watching. 1 year later, I stood in the community center on Jefferson Street, looking at a room filled with faces I never expected to see together. Former airport employees, labor rights advocates, attorneys, social workers, and survivors. People who'd been discarded by the systems supposed to protect them. The sign above the door read, "The Lilly Foundation, protecting workers, honoring dignity." "Mrs. Wellington?" A young woman approached, clutching a folder to her chest. "I'm Maria Santos. 6 months ago, my company tried to fire me when I disclosed my lupus diagnosis. I found your story online, contacted David Chen, and he helped me file a complaint. I won. I kept my job and my insurance. I just wanted to say thank you." I hugged her, still getting used to this new role. Advocate, voice, symbol. People kept calling me those things, but I still felt like just Lily, a woman who'd been pushed too far and finally pushed back. The settlement from Metro International Airport had been substantial. $2, $3 million split among 12 plaintiffs, with my portion covering my medical expenses, lost wages, and then some. But more importantly, the airport had implemented sweeping policy changes, mandatory anti-discrimination training, third-party oversight of terminations, protected medical leave, an anonymous reporting system for employees facing retaliation. Marcus had become a case study in what not to do. His termination from the airport was just the beginning. The Department of Labor investigation revealed a pattern of insurance fraud that extended beyond employee terminations. The airport had been systematically counseling managers to eliminate high-cost employees before insurance renewals, saving the company millions while destroying lives. Marcus, as the architect of the strategy in his department, faced federal charges: wire fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching my son's defense crumble under the weight of evidence he'd created himself. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was 2 months ago. I'd gone, though David advised against it. I needed to see it through to the end. "Marcus Wellington," Judge Morrison had said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You were given every advantage. Education, opportunity, a mother who sacrificed everything for your success. And you used those advantages to prey on vulnerable people, including the woman who gave you life. The court sentences you to 42 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. Additionally, you are permanently barred from holding management positions in any company participating in federal health insurance programs." Marcus had stood there, 33 years old, his perfect future reduced to a prison sentence and a destroyed reputation. He'd turned to look at me one last time before being led away. I'd seen him mouth the words, "I'm sorry." I'd nodded. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Sorry didn't undo what he'd done, but maybe it was a start toward him becoming someone better. Someday. The months after the trial were strange. My cancer treatment continued, 6 rounds of chemotherapy followed by radiation. But this time I had support. Teresa drove me to appointments. David's wife Linda brought me meals. Former coworkers visited, bringing flowers and magazines and stories about how things were changing at the airport. Keisha Brooks, the HR employee who'd been pushed out for resisting Marcus's schemes, was rehired with back pay and promoted to Director of Employee Relations. Her first act was implementing a protection program for workers with medical conditions. "You started something," she'd told me during one of her visits. "People aren't afraid anymore. They're speaking up, filing complaints, demanding better. You showed them it's possible to win." That's when the idea for the foundation formed. David helped me establish it, using part of my settlement to fund operations. Our mission was simple: provide legal assistance, medical advocacy, and financial support to workers facing discrimination based on age, disability, or health conditions. Within 3 months, we'd helped 47 people. Within 6 months, that number grew to 200. Attorneys volunteered their time. Healthcare advocates donated services. Companies reached out offering jobs to people we'd helped, wanting to show they valued workers other employers had discarded, and the stories kept coming. Every day, my email inbox filled with messages from people who'd seen my case, who'd found courage in my fight, who were standing up for themselves because I'd shown them it was possible. Now, standing in this community center at our 1-year anniversary event, I looked around at what we'd built from the ashes of my worst moment. Teresa was there, having taken early retirement from the airport with a full pension after 34 years. She'd become the Foundation's volunteer coordinator, organizing events and managing our growing network of supporters. David Chen stood near the refreshment table, talking to a group of attorneys he'd recruited. His small practice had grown into a full-scale workers' rights firm, with 3 new associates, and a reputation for taking on cases others wouldn't touch. Even Judge Morrison had come, speaking briefly about the importance of holding power accountable. "Mrs. Wellington's case reminded us that justice isn't just about laws," she'd said. "It's about recognizing the humanity in every person, regardless of their position or their circumstances." My phone buzzed. A text from Linda Chen. "Turn on Channel 7, now." Someone found the remote and switched on the TV mounted in the corner. The local news was running a story about workplace discrimination, featuring my case as the catalyst for recent legislative changes. "The Lily Wellington case shocked the nation 1 year ago," the reporter said over footage of me leaving the courthouse. "But it did more than expose one man's cruelty. It sparked a movement. 12 states have since strengthened worker protections. Congress is considering federal legislation nicknamed Lily's Law that would impose severe penalties on companies that discriminate based on medical conditions. And Metro International Airport has become a model for employee protection policies." The report cut to an interview with Catherine Reeves, the airport's director. What happened to Lily Wellington was unacceptable, but her courage to speak up, to fight back, forced us to examine every policy, every practice, every decision we make. We're a better organization because she refused to be silent. The screen showed more footage. Protesters carrying signs reading, "We are all Lily," workers testifying before Congress, companies announcing new protection policies. My face appeared again, from an interview I'd done 6 months ago. "I don't want to be a symbol," my recorded voice said. "I just want to be a reminder. A reminder that every person has value, that age and illness don't make you disposable, and that speaking truth to power isn't just possible. It's necessary." Someone turned off the TV. The room was quiet for a moment, then erupted in applause. I felt my face grow hot, uncomfortable with the attention. "Speech!" someone called out. Others joined in. "Speech! Speech!" I walked to the front of the room, my hands shaking slightly. The chemotherapy had been hard, but I was in remission now. My hair was growing back, short and gray and mine. My body was weaker than it used to be, but my spirit was stronger than ever. "A year ago," I began, my voice steady. "I was standing in a break room at Metro International Airport, watching my son fire me in front of my coworkers. I was sick. I was scared. I was convinced my life was over. I paused, looking around at the faces watching me. I was wrong. My old life was over. But something new was beginning. Something I never could have imagined. People ask me if I regret what happened. If I wish Marcus had made different choices, that I'd never had to fight this battle. And honestly, some days, yes. Some days I wish I still had my son, that our relationship hadn't been destroyed, that I didn't have to see his mistakes broadcast across the nation. But then, I think about Maria, who kept her job because of our case. I think about the 42 workers who were about to be terminated at Metro before the investigation stopped it. I think about the hundreds of people who've contacted the foundation, who've filed their own complaints, who've refused to accept being treated as disposable. My voice grew stronger. I think about every person who saw what happened to me and decided they didn't have to accept it happening to them. And I realize that sometimes our worst moments become our most important ones. Sometimes being broken open is the only way light gets in. I looked directly at the cameras in the back, local news stations covering the event. If you're watching this, if you're being discriminated against, harassed, pushed out because someone decided you're too old or too sick or too expensive to matter, know this. You have power. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And there are people who will stand with you when you decide to fight. To the companies watching, to the managers who think they can discard people without consequences, remember Marcus Wellington. Remember that recordings exist. Witnesses exist. Justice exists. And the person you're underestimating might just be the one who brings your whole system down. The room erupted in applause again. People stood, some crying, some cheering. Teresa was wiping tears from her eyes. David was nodding with quiet satisfaction. As the crowd dispersed, mingling and sharing stories, I stepped outside for air. The evening was cool, autumn settling over the city. I wrapped my cardigan around myself and looked up at the darkening sky. Mrs. Wellington? I turned. A young man stood there, maybe 25, in a delivery uniform. I don't mean to bother you, he said nervously. But I wanted you to know. My mom was fired from her job last year when she got diagnosed with Parkinson's. She was going to just accept it, thought she had no choice. But then she saw your story. She fought back. She won. And now she tells everyone. If Lily Wellington can take down her own son to do what's right, I can stand up to my boss. He handed me a folded piece of paper. She wanted me to give you this if I ever met you. I unfolded it. A simple note in shaky handwriting. Thank you for showing us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being terrified and doing what's right anyway. You saved more than yourself. You saved all of us. Patricia Chen. I looked up, tears blurring my vision. Patricia Chen? Is she? David Chen's mother, the young man said, smiling. Well, was. She passed 2 months ago, but she spent her last year fighting. She got to keep her job, her dignity, her insurance. She got to leave this world knowing she stood up for herself. She said that gift came from you. After he left, I stood there holding that note, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fight, the victory, the transformation. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mom, I know I have no right to contact you. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. I'm working with the prison's legal aid program, helping other inmates file workplace discrimination complaints. It's not redemption. Nothing I do will ever make up for what I did to you. But maybe I can use what I learned from you about fighting for what's right to help someone else. I hope someday you can be proud of me again. Marcus. I stared at that message for a long time. Was it genuine? Or was it manipulation? One more attempt to get something from me. I didn't know. Maybe I'd never know. But I realized something important. It didn't matter. Marcus's redemption wasn't my responsibility. I'd spent my whole life carrying him, sacrificing for him, trying to make him into a good man. That job was done. He'd have to do the rest himself. I deleted the message and put my phone away. Inside, the celebration continued. The Lily Foundation, our little organization built from pain and transformed into purpose, was thriving. We'd helped hundreds of people. We'd changed policies. We'd shown that one person standing up could start a wave that changed everything. Teresa appeared in the doorway. "You okay out here?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Just thinking." "About Marcus?" "About everything. About how a year ago I thought my life was ending. And now look at this." I gestured toward the community center, toward the people inside, toward the future we were building. "You know what the best revenge is?" Teresa asked, linking her arm through mine as we walked back inside. "What?" "Living well, doing good, becoming someone so strong that the person who tried to break you becomes irrelevant." She smiled. "You didn't just survive, Lily. You transformed. And that's more powerful than any revenge could ever be." As we rejoined the celebration, I thought about that. About transformation. About how pain can be alchemized into purpose. About how the worst thing that ever happened to me became the catalyst for the best thing I'd ever done. Marcus had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a line item in a budget, to prove that I was disposable. Instead, he'd proven the opposite. He'd proven that even when the world tries to throw you away, even when the people who should love you treat you as worthless, you can stand up. You can fight back. You can win. And more than that, you can take your pain and use it to protect others. You can take your worst moment and transform it into someone else's hope. That night, back in my apartment, still small, still modest, but paid for and mine, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked at the framed newspaper clipping on my wall. The headline read, "Mother's Courage Sparks National Movement for Worker Protection." Below it, I'd added my own handwritten note. Sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up creating something they never intended. A fighter who refuses to be silent, a voice for those who can't speak, and a reminder that dignity isn't something anyone can take away. You have to give it up. And I never did. The best revenge isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's becoming someone so strong, so purposeful, so impactful, that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. It's taking the worst thing they did to you and using it to help others. It's transforming pain into power. Marcus tried to erase me. Instead, he ensured I'd be remembered. Not as his victim, but as the woman who refused to be silent. As the mother who taught the world that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. And that lesson? That's the legacy I'm building. Not just for myself, but for every person who's ever been told they don't matter. You matter. Your voice matters. Your fight matters. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. Because the moment you stand up, you give permission for everyone watching to stand up too. And that's how movements begin. That's how systems change. That's how we create a world where being sick, being old, being vulnerable doesn't make you disposable. It starts with one person refusing to stay silent, one person deciding they deserve better, one person standing up and saying, "Not me, not today, not ever again." If my story showed you anything, let it be this. You are stronger than you know, more valuable than anyone can measure, and more powerful than anyone who tries to diminish you could ever imagine. Stand up, speak out, and know that somewhere, someone like me is standing with you.